At JFK's bustling Terminal 4, Gate 23, the air crackles with tension as Delta passengers rush to board. Sarah Johnson, a dignified 65-year-old black woman clutching a cane, steps into the first-class line, her navy blazer exuding quiet confidence. But Emily Parker, a 30-year-old flight attendant with a chip on her shoulder, isn't having it. Fueled by bias, Emily accuses Sarah of faking her ticket and, in a jaw-dropping move, tears it apart in front of a stunned crowd. Gasps echo as Sarah's piercing gaze meets Emily's defiance. What's driving Emily's reckless cruelty? And who is Sarah, really, to face this humiliation with such unshakable calm? As a journalist in the crowd starts filming, you'll wonder, what's about to unravel on this Delta flight? Don't miss the drama. Subscribe now for more stories that spark your heart and mind. The clock above Gate 23 at JFK International Airport's Terminal 4 read 7:02 a.m., but the chaos felt timeless. Travelers swarmed the Delta Airlines boarding area, their rolling suitcases clattering over the polished tiles like a stampede. The air was thick with the bitter aroma of Starbucks coffee from a nearby kiosk, mingling with the metallic tang of jet fuel wafting through the open jetway. Overhead, a garbled announcement blared about a delayed flight to Atlanta, its words drowned by the hum of impatient voices. Digital boards flashed red with updates, casting a frenetic glow over the crowd. Amid this whirlwind stood Sarah Johnson, a 65-year-old black woman whose silver hair was swept into a neat bun, her navy blazer crisp despite the early hour. Her cane, a polished mahogany heirloom from her late father, clicked softly as she moved toward the first-class line, her posture radiating a quiet authority that seemed to part the chaos around her. Sarah's eyes, sharp and warm, scanned the gate area, taking in the frazzled families, harried business travelers, and a young couple snapping selfies by the Delta logo. She adjusted her blazer, mentally rehearsing for a critical board meeting in Atlanta that could reshape Delta's future. Her calm was a stark contrast to the terminal's pulse, but it didn't go unnoticed. Tom Reynolds, a 40-year-old journalist with tousled brown hair and a notepad tucked under his arm, watched her from the Delta Sky Club Lounge's glass wall. He'd seen countless power players pass through JFK, but something about Sarah, her unhurried grace, the way her cane seemed an extension of her strength, made him pause. "She's someone," he muttered, scribbling a note, his reporter's instinct tingling. Near the gate, Emily Parker, a 30-year-old flight attendant, stood rigid in her Delta uniform, her blonde hair pinned tightly as if holding her composure in place. Her blue eyes darted over the first-class line, her lips pursed in a familiar scowl. Emily prided herself on upholding the airline's standards, a legacy she felt tied to her father, a former Delta pilot. To her, first class was a sanctuary for the elite, not a place for just anyone. When her gaze landed on Sarah, her brow furrowed. An elderly black woman with a cane? In her first-class line? Emily's mind raced with assumptions, her insecurity masked by a veneer of professionalism. She'd seen passengers try to sneak into first class before, and she wasn't about to let it slide, not today, not on her watch. "Excuse me, ma'am," Emily called out sharply, her voice cutting through the din as she approached Sarah. "This line is for first-class passengers only." The words carried a sting, laced with condescension that made nearby passengers glance up. Sarah turned slowly, her expression unruffled, her cane steady in her hand. "I know where I'm standing. Thank you," she replied softly, her voice warm yet firm, carrying a natural authority that made Emily blink. The crowd hushed slightly, sensing the shift in the air. Lisa Chen, a 25-year-old Asian-American gate agent with a neat Delta badge, froze at her podium, her fingers hovering over the ticket scanner. She admired Sarah's poise but felt a knot of unease at Emily's tone. Lisa had seen Emily's rigidity before, but this felt different, personal. Emily's cheeks flushed, her irritation flaring at Sarah's calm defiance. "I need to see your ticket," she demanded, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing with doubt. Sarah handed over her boarding pass, her movements deliberate, her gaze never wavering. Emily snatched it, her fingers trembling slightly, and scanned it with a scowl. The scanner beeped green, confirming Sarah's first-class status, but Emily's prejudice clouded her judgment. She couldn't reconcile the woman before her with the elite status she guarded so fiercely. In a calculated move to assert control, Emily stepped forward, her shoulder deliberately brushing Sarah's cane. The mahogany stick slipped from Sarah's grip, clattering loudly against the tiles, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the crowded terminal. A collective gasp rippled through the gate area. A child nearby tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Why did she do that?" Tom's pen froze mid-sentence, his eyes wide as he reached for his phone, sensing a story unfolding. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth, her instinct to intervene warring with her fear of Emily's seniority. Sarah raised a trembling hand to steady herself, her eyes locking onto Emily's with a mix of disappointment and resolve. "That was unnecessary," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the slight shake in her hand. Emily's smirk faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face, but her ego held firm. "I'm just doing my job," she snapped, her tone defensive, betraying a hint of nerves. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, phones emerging to capture the scene. Tom, now filming discreetly, leaned forward, his journalist's nose for a scoop confirmed. Lisa shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the scanner, tempted to check Sarah's status but hesitant under Emily's glare. Sarah bent slowly to retrieve her cane, her movements dignified, refusing to let Emily's act diminish her. As she straightened, her eyes met Emily's again, a silent challenge that made the younger woman flinch. The terminal's chaos seemed to fade, the focus narrowing to this moment of confrontation. What had Emily just unleashed? And who was this woman, standing so unshaken in the face of such blatant disrespect? The answers hung in the air, heavy with promise, as the boarding call for Delta Flight 934 echoed overhead, signaling the next chapter of this unfolding drama. The air at Gate 23 in JFK's Terminal 4 hung heavy, the echo of Sarah Johnson's fallen cane still reverberating in the minds of the onlookers. The Delta Airlines boarding area, already a pressure cooker of delayed flights and restless travelers, felt like it had hit pause. The digital board above flickered with a red "Delayed" for Flight 934 to Atlanta, casting a tense glow over the crowd. Travelers clutching Starbucks cups and dragging suitcases stood frozen, their eyes darting between Sarah, the 65-year-old black woman clutching her mahogany cane, and Emily Parker, the 30-year-old flight attendant whose blonde hair was pinned so tightly it mirrored her clenched jaw. Sarah's navy blazer remained crisp, her silver hair glinting under the terminal lights, but her eyes, sharp, unyielding, locked onto Emily with a quiet intensity that made the younger woman shift uncomfortably. Emily's heart pounded, her cheeks flushed with a mix of irritation and embarrassment. She'd meant to put Sarah in her place, to protect the sanctity of first class, but Sarah's calm defiance, that was unnecessary, had thrown her off. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a low hum of disapproval that pricked at Emily's pride. She glanced at the boarding pass in her hand, the scanner's green beep still fresh in her memory, but her mind churned with doubt. This woman doesn't belong here, she thought, her prejudice drowning out logic. Her father's voice, stern from years as a Delta pilot, echoed in her head. First class is earned, not assumed. To Emily, Sarah's presence was an affront, a challenge to the order she'd sworn to uphold. "I think there's a problem here, ma'am," Emily said loudly, her voice dripping with condescension as she held up Sarah's ticket. "First-class tickets aren't something just anyone can afford. We've had issues with fraudulent passes before, and I'm not letting it happen on my flight." The words cut through the terminal, sharp and deliberate, designed to shame. A gasp rippled through the crowd, and a child nearby, clutching a teddy bear, whispered to her mother, "Why is she so mean?" Sarah's expression didn't waver, but her grip on her cane tightened, the wood warm against her palm. She handed over her ticket again, her movement slow and deliberate. "Please verify it," she said evenly, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with Emily's venom. Tom Reynolds, the journalist perched near the gate, had his phone out now, recording the scene from behind a pillar. His tousled brown hair fell over his eyes as he leaned forward, his reporter's instinct screaming that this was no ordinary spat. "This is going viral," he muttered, adjusting the angle to capture Sarah's unyielding gaze. Lisa Chen, the 25-year-old gate agent, stood at her podium, her fingers trembling over the ticket scanner. She wanted to speak up, to tell Emily to check the system, but Emily's seniority loomed like a shadow. Lisa's ambition to climb Delta's ranks warred with her empathy for Sarah, whose dignity reminded her of her own grandmother's quiet strength. She bit her lip, her eyes flicking to the crowd, where phones were now raised, capturing every word. Emily's hands shook as she took Sarah's ticket, her confidence fraying under the weight of the crowd's scrutiny. She didn't check the system. Couldn't, not with her pride on the line. Instead, in a calculated act to assert dominance, she held the ticket aloft and tore it in two, the rip echoing like a slap. "This is invalid," she declared, her voice cracking slightly, betraying her nerves. The crowd erupted in murmurs, a man in a suit muttering, "That's not right," while a woman nearby tweeted, "Disgusting behavior at Delta JFK." Sarah's eyes narrowed, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face, but she didn't flinch. "You're making a mistake," she said softly, her tone laced with a warning that sent a chill through Emily's spine. Inside, Emily was unraveling. She'd expected Sarah to back down, to scurry away in shame, but this woman stood like a rock, her cane a symbol of defiance. Emily's mind flashed to a memory from her first year at Delta, when a passenger had humiliated her for a minor error, fueling her need to control every interaction since. Sarah, in her mind, was another threat to that control, an outsider breaching her carefully guarded domain. "I'm protecting this flight," Emily snapped, her voice rising defensively. "People like you think they can just walk in here." She stopped, catching herself, but the implication hung heavy, raw with prejudice. Lisa's heart raced, her fingers inching toward the scanner. She could check Sarah's status, could end this, but Emily's glare pinned her in place. Tom's camera stayed steady, his pulse quickening as he sensed the story's weight. The crowd's tension was palpable, a mix of outrage and curiosity, as passengers whispered about lawsuits and viral videos. Sarah, unmoved, adjusted her blazer, her voice cutting through the noise. "Defaming a passenger is serious, Emily," she said firmly, using the flight attendant's name with deliberate precision. "I trust you'll check the system now." The challenge hung in the air, daring Emily to double down or retreat. Emily's face burned, her hands trembling as she clutched the torn ticket. The crowd's eyes bored into her, their phones a silent jury. She wanted to scream, to make Sarah disappear, but Sarah's unwavering gaze held her captive. The terminal's chaos seemed to fade, the focus narrowing to this standoff. What would Emily do next? And what power did Sarah hold to stand so unshaken? The answers loomed as the boarding call for Flight 934 crackled overhead, signaling the storm about to break. The tension at Gate 23 in JFK's Terminal 4 was a living thing, coiling tighter with every passing second. The Delta Airlines boarding area, already strained by the delayed Flight 934 to Atlanta, felt like a stage under harsh spotlights. The digital board overhead blinked "delayed" in crimson, its glow reflecting off the polished tiles where Sarah Johnson's torn ticket lay in pieces. Sarah, the 65-year-old black woman with silver hair and a navy blazer, stood resolute, her mahogany cane, her father's heirloom, steady in her hand. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, held Emily Parker in a silent reckoning. Emily, the 30-year-old flight attendant, stood frozen, her blonde hair still tightly pinned but her face flushed with a mix of defiance and dread. The crowd's murmurs swelled, a chorus of whispers and gasps as phones captured the standoff, their lenses glinting like a jury's gaze. Sarah's voice broke the silence, soft but piercing, each word deliberate. "You've made a grave mistake, Emily," she said, her tone warm yet laced with a chilling authority that sent a shiver through the terminal. The crowd hushed, sensing a shift, as if Sarah's words carried a hidden weight. Emily's smirk faltered, her hands trembling as she clutched the remnants of the torn ticket. She'd expected Sarah to crumble, to retreat under her accusations, but this woman's composure was a wall she couldn't breach. "I'm just following protocol," Emily stammered nervously, her voice cracking, but the excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. Her mind raced, replaying the scanner's green beep, the confirmation she'd ignored in her rush to judge. Who is she? She thought, panic creeping in. Tom Reynolds, the 40-year-old journalist, leaned against a pillar, his phone recording steadily. His tousled brown hair fell over his eyes as he adjusted the angle, capturing Sarah's cryptic warning. "This is bigger than I thought," he whispered, his notepad forgotten in his pocket. Tom's years covering corporate scandals told him Sarah was no ordinary passenger. Her poise, her command, screamed power. Nearby, Lisa Chen, the 25-year-old gate agent, stood at her podium, her heart pounding. Her fingers hovered over the ticket scanner, driven by a mix of duty and admiration for Sarah's strength. Emily's seniority loomed, but Lisa couldn't ignore the injustice unfolding. Discreetly, she typed Sarah's name into the system, her breath catching as the screen flashed. Sarah Johnson, CEO, Delta Airlines. Lisa's eyes widened, her pulse racing. "Oh my God," she muttered softly, glancing at Sarah with newfound awe. Maria Gonzalez, a 45-year-old Latina passenger in a tailored blazer, stood among the crowd, her warm eyes narrowing with indignation. A former civil rights advocate, Maria had spent decades fighting systemic bias, and Emily's actions hit a raw nerve. She leaned toward Tom, her voice low but intense. "This isn't just one bad apple," she whispered urgently. "It's the system letting her think this is okay." Tom nodded, his camera still rolling, sensing the story's deeper layers. Maria's presence grounded the scene, her empathy for Sarah adding a moral anchor to the crowd's growing unrest. A young man nearby, scrolling on his phone, tweeted, "Flight attendant at Delta JFK just tore up a black woman's ticket. This is messed up." The post gained traction, hashtags like #Justice at JFK flickering across screens. Emily, cornered by Sarah's warning and the crowd's scrutiny, felt her control slipping. Her prejudice, fueled by years of unchecked assumptions, pushed her to double down. She grabbed her radio, her voice sharp and desperate. "Security to gate 23, she said, her eyes darting to Sarah. "We have a disruptive passenger." The lie was a desperate bid to reclaim authority, to paint Sarah as the problem. But the plan backfired. 2 security officers approached, their Delta badges gleaming, but they hesitated, noting Sarah's calm demeanor. "Ma'am, is there an issue?" one asked cautiously, his gaze shifting between Sarah and Emily. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her voice steady. "Only with assumptions," she replied warmly, her words carrying a quiet power that made the officers pause. The crowd's tension spiked, passengers whispering furiously. A mother clutched her daughter's hand, murmuring, "This isn't right." A businessman in a suit shook his head, muttering, "She's digging her own grave." Emily's face burned, her radio trembling in her hand. She'd expected security to whisk Sarah away, to validate her authority, but Sarah's composure unraveled her plan. Lisa, still at the podium, glanced at her screen, the CEO confirmation glaring back. Her instinct to speak up battled her fear, but Sarah's strength inspired her. She took a deep breath, ready to act, her fingers poised to alert a supervisor. Tom's recording captured every detail. The crowd's unrest, Emily's faltering bravado, Sarah's unyielding presence. He sensed the moment was pivotal, a spark that could ignite a larger reckoning. Maria's words echoed in his mind, tying this incident to broader injustices. Sarah, at the center, adjusted her cane, its soft click a reminder of her resilience. Her warning hung in the air, a promise of consequences Emily couldn't yet fathom. The terminal's chaos seemed to fade, the focus narrowing to this charged moment. What truth was about to surface? And how would Emily face the fallout of her actions? The answers loomed as the boarding call for Flight 934 crackled once more, a signal that the drama was far from over. The atmosphere at Gate 23 in JFK's Terminal 4 crackled with anticipation, the crowd's murmurs a low hum against the backdrop of Delta Airlines' delayed Flight 934 to Atlanta. The digital board overhead blinked, delayed in red, its light glinting off the tiles where Sarah Johnson stood, her mahogany cane steady in her hand. The 65-year-old black woman, her silver hair neatly swept back, exuded a quiet authority in her navy blazer, her eyes fixed on Emily Parker with a mix of resolve and disappointment. Emily, the 30-year-old flight attendant, clutched her radio, her blonde hair pinned tightly but her face pale, her call for security faltering as the two officers hesitated, their eyes on Sarah's unshaken demeanor. Phones dotted the crowd, their lenses capturing every moment, while hashtags like #Justice at JFK trended on social media, amplifying the standoff. Sarah's cryptic warning, "You've made a grave mistake, Emily," still hung in the air, its weight sinking into the crowd. Emily's chest tightened, her prejudice-fueled bravado crumbling under Sarah's piercing gaze. She'd torn Sarah's ticket, called security, but nothing was going as planned. The security officers, their Delta badges gleaming, exchanged uncertain glances. "Ma'am, can you clarify the issue?" one asked Emily cautiously, his tone neutral but probing. Emily opened her mouth, but before she could respond, a new figure emerged from the jetway, his graying hair and crisp Delta pin marking him as someone of authority. Michael Davis, the 50-year-old operations manager, strode toward the gate, his stern expression softening as his eyes landed on Sarah. "Miss Johnson," Michael said respectfully, his voice carrying a formal warmth as he bowed slightly. "I'm deeply sorry for this disruption." The crowd fell silent, phones still raised as Michael turned to Emily, his tone sharpening. "Stand down, Miss Parker. You've misjudged the situation." Emily's face drained of color, her radio slipping in her trembling hand. The crowd gasped, a ripple of shock spreading as Michael continued, his voice clear and deliberate. "This is Sarah Johnson, CEO of Delta Airlines. Her place in first class and anywhere in this company is unquestionable." The words landed like a thunderclap, the crowd erupting in murmurs of disbelief and awe. A woman nearby whispered, "The CEO?" while a man tweeted, "Delta's CEO just got her ticket torn up at JFK. Unreal." Lisa Chen, the 25-year-old gate agent, stood at her podium, her heart racing as she clutched the scanner. Her earlier discovery, Sarah's CEO status flashing on her screen, now felt monumental. Emboldened, she stepped forward, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I confirmed her status, sir," she said to Michael, her eyes flicking to Sarah with admiration. "It's legitimate." Michael nodded, his expression softening toward Lisa, but his gaze hardened as it returned to Emily. Tom Reynolds, the 40-year-old journalist, texted his editor furiously, "Scoop of the year, Delta CEO humiliated at JFK Gate." His camera stayed on, capturing Michael's apology and Sarah's stoic expression, sensing the story's viral potential. Maria Gonzalez, the 45-year-old passenger and former civil rights advocate, filmed the scene, her warm eyes glistening with pride for Sarah. Maria's years fighting systemic bias made this moment personal. Sarah's dignity in the face of prejudice was a victory she'd long championed. She whispered to a nearby passenger, "This is what justice looks like," her voice thick with emotion. Emily, meanwhile, stood rooted, her world unraveling. Desperate to salvage her pride, she leaned toward a nearby crew member, muttering frantically, "That ticket was fake, I'm sure of it." But Michael overheard, his voice cutting through her lie. "Enough, Miss Parker," he said sternly. "Your actions are unacceptable. Step aside." The crowd murmured in approval, Emily's sabotage attempt collapsing under Michael's authority. Sarah adjusted her cane, its soft click grounding her as she faced Michael. "Thank you, Michael," she said warmly, her voice steady but tinged with weariness. "I'd like to board now, if we're done here." Her stoic expression masked the weight of the moment, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of pain, not for herself, but for the prejudice that had fueled this ordeal. Michael nodded, gesturing toward the jetway. "Of course, Miss Johnson. We'll handle this." The crowd parted, some clapping softly, others filming Sarah's measured steps, her cane a symbol of resilience. Emily watched, her face ashen, the reality of her mistake sinking in. She'd targeted the most powerful woman in the company, and the consequences loomed. Tom's fingers flew across his phone, drafting a headline. "Delta CEO faces discrimination at own airline." Lisa, now standing taller, felt a surge of pride, her loyalty to Sarah solidified. Maria's video, already uploaded, gained traction, comments flooding in. "Respect to this queen." The terminal's chaos resumed, the boarding call for Flight 934 crackling overhead, but the energy had shifted. Sarah's identity, now revealed, cast a new light on the incident, and Emily's actions stood exposed. The crowd's whispers turned to questions. What would happen to Emily? And how would Sarah, with her quiet power, shape what came next? The answers waited beyond the jetway as the gate area buzzed with the promise of justice. The buzz at Gate 23 in JFK's Terminal 4 lingered like static, even as Sarah Johnson disappeared into the jetway, her navy blazer and mahogany cane a fading emblem of resilience. The crowd, still clutching phones, whispered furiously their videos of Sarah's CEO reveal, confirmed by Michael Davis, Delta's operations manager, spreading across social media with hashtags like #Delta Justice. The digital board above flashed "boarding" for Flight 934 to Atlanta, but the drama wasn't over. Michael, his graying hair catching the terminal's harsh lights, fixed a stern gaze on Emily Parker. The 30-year-old flight attendant stood frozen, her blonde hair still pinned tightly, but her Delta uniform seemed to sag, mirroring her crumbling composure. Her face, pale and drawn, betrayed the weight of her mistake. She'd targeted Sarah Johnson, Delta's CEO, with prejudice-fueled accusations. Michael gestured toward a private crew room off the gate, his voice low but firm. "Miss Parker, with me. Now." Emily's legs moved mechanically, her hands trembling as she followed, the crowd's eyes boring into her back. Inside the crew room, the sterile decor, gray walls, a chipped table, and a flickering fluorescent light, felt like a cell. Michael closed the door, the click loud in the silence. "Your actions were unacceptable," he said sharply, his Delta pin glinting. "You've disrespected a passenger, our CEO, and violated every standard we uphold. You're suspended indefinitely, effective immediately." Emily's breath hitched, her mind reeling. Suspension. Her career, her identity tied to Delta, flashed before her. "But I was just—" she started, her voice shaky, only to be cut off by Michael's raised hand. "You'll also apologize to Ms. Johnson, publicly, in front of the passengers." Emily's stomach churned, shame and defiance warring within her. She'd grown up idolizing her father, a Delta pilot, and saw herself as a gatekeeper of the airline's prestige. But targeting Sarah, driven by bias she hadn't questioned, had unraveled everything. Back at the gate, the crowd waited, their phones ready. Lisa Chen, the 25-year-old gate agent, stood by the podium. her neat uniform a contrast to her racing heart. She admired Sarah's grace and felt a quiet pride in confirming her status. Approaching Sarah, who'd returned briefly to the gate, Lisa offered a bottle of water, her voice soft. "Miss Johnson, I'm so sorry," she said earnestly. Sarah's warm eyes met hers, a faint smile breaking through. "You did the right thing, Lisa," she said gently, her cane steady as she prepared to face Emily's apology. Maria Gonzalez, the 45-year-old passenger and former civil rights advocate, watched from the crowd, her elegant blazer hiding a fierce empathy for Sarah. Maria's years fighting injustice made Emily's actions sting, but she also saw a young woman trapped by her own flaws. As Emily emerged from the crew room, her steps faltering, Maria's gaze softened, sensing the apology's weight. Tom Reynolds, the 40-year-old journalist, stood nearby, his tousled brown hair falling over his eyes as he recorded. His story was taking shape, a tale of prejudice and accountability at Delta's core. But Emily's next move caught his attention. Spotting Tom's phone, she lunged, her voice desperate. "You can't post that," she hissed, grabbing for it. Her fingers fumbled, the phone slipping to the floor, drawing gasps from the crowd. Tom snatched it back, his voice calm but firm. "This is the truth, Miss Parker." The blunder only amplified the crowd's scrutiny, phones capturing her misstep. Michael stepped forward, his expression grim. "Enough, Miss Parker. Apologize." "Now." Emily faced the crowd, her voice cracking as she addressed Sarah, who stood near the jetway. "Ms. Johnson, I'm sorry," she stammered, her cheeks burning. "I was wrong to question you, to do what I did." The words felt like glass in her throat, each syllable a blow to her pride. Sarah's expression remained stoic, her eyes searching Emily's for sincerity. She nodded once, a silent acceptance, her dignity unshaken. "Let's move forward," she said quietly, her voice warm but resolute, before turning to board. The crowd murmured, some clapping, others tweeting. "Delta CEO gets apology, but is it enough?" Inside the crew room, Emily sank into a chair, her uniform crumpled, her mind a storm of shame and defiance. She'd apologized, but the crowd's judgment, Tom's video, and her suspension loomed. "I was protecting the airline," she told herself, but the lie felt thin. Maria approached, her voice gentle but firm. "You've got a chance to learn from this," she said compassionately, her advocate's heart seeing potential for growth. Emily's eyes glistened, but she turned away, defiance flickering. Lisa, lingering nearby, felt a surge of loyalty to Sarah, but also pity for Emily's downfall. Tom, outside, emailed his editor. "Delta flight attendant suspended after CEO confrontation." Stories just beginning. The terminal's chaos resumed, the boarding call for Flight 934 echoing. Emily's public apology, though forced, marked a turning point, but her internal struggle was far from over. Sarah, now boarding, carried the weight of the incident with grace, her cane a reminder of her strength. The crowd dispersed, but their videos and whispers promised the story would spread. What would Emily face next? And how would Sarah shape the aftermath? The answers lay ahead as the jetway doors closed, carrying the drama toward Atlanta. The first-class cabin of Delta Flight 934 to Atlanta hummed with quiet luxury, a stark contrast to the chaos of JFK's Terminal 4. Soft, ambient lighting bathed the signature blue leather seats, and the faint scent of warm towels mingled with the low drone of the engines. Sarah Johnson, the 65-year-old CEO of Delta Airlines, settled into her window seat, her navy blazer draped neatly over the armrest. Her silver hair caught the light, and her mahogany cane rested against the bulkhead, a silent testament to her resilience. Her mind was on the board meeting awaiting her in Atlanta, but her eyes carried the weight of the morning's ordeal. Emily Parker's prejudice, the torn ticket, the public apology. Yet Sarah's composure remained unbroken, her warm authority a beacon in the cabin. Emily, the 30-year-old flight attendant, moved through the aisle with stiff precision, her Delta uniform pristine but her blonde hair slightly askew, a crack in her usual control. Her suspension loomed, but Michael Davis, the operations manager, had delivered one final directive. Serve Sarah on this flight. A lesson in humility at Sarah's own request. Emily's jaw clenched as she approached Sarah, her resentment simmering. To her, this was a punishment, a public shaming orchestrated by the woman she'd wronged. "Can I get you anything, Miss Johnson?" she asked, her voice tight, barely masking her bitterness. Sarah looked up, her gaze steady but not unkind. "A coffee, black, please," she said warmly, her tone a quiet challenge to Emily's hostility. Tom Reynolds, the 40-year-old journalist, sat a few rows back, his tousled brown hair falling over his notepad as he jotted observations. His phone buzzed with notifications. His video of the Gate 23 incident was going viral, retweeted with captions like, "Delta CEO schools flight attendant." He watched Emily closely, sensing the tension in her rigid movements. This flight, he knew, was part of the story, a chapter of accountability unfolding at 30,000 feet. Nearby, Maria Gonzalez, the 45-year-old passenger and former civil rights advocate, adjusted her elegant blazer, her warm eyes on Sarah. Maria's years fighting injustice made her admire Sarah's grace, and she hoped this flight might nudge Emily toward reflection. She leaned toward Sarah, her voice soft. "You handled that back there with such strength," she said sincerely. Sarah smiled faintly. "It's a strength you earn," she replied, her words carrying a lifetime of battles. The cabin buzzed quietly, passengers whispering about the JFK incident. A businessman scrolled through Twitter where a post read, "Delta's CEO got her ticket torn up, now the flight attendant's serving her. Poetic justice." Emily, overhearing snippets, felt her cheeks burn. Her pride, tied to her father's legacy as a Delta pilot, rebelled against this role. As she prepared Sarah's coffee, her mind churned with defiance. "She doesn't get to humiliate me," she thought, her prejudice still clouding her judgment. In a petty act of sabotage, she tilted the cup slightly, letting a trickle of coffee spill onto the tray near Sarah's seat. "Oops," she said flatly, her eyes daring Sarah to react. But Sarah, with a calm flick of her napkin, wiped the spill, her gaze locking onto Emily's. "Careful," she said softly, her tone a mix of warning and pity, exposing Emily's pettiness without a word of accusation. The moment didn't go unnoticed. Tom scribbled furiously, noting Emily's failed attempt and Sarah's unshaken dignity. A passenger nearby, filming discreetly, uploaded the clip with the caption, "Flight attendant tries to mess with Delta CEO again. She's unstoppable." Maria, watching, shook her head slightly, her advocate's heart torn between frustration and hope for Emily's growth. She approached Sarah, her voice gentle. "You're teaching her, even now," she said thoughtfully. Sarah's eyes softened. "Some lessons take time," she replied, her cane glinting as she shifted, her focus returning to her notes for the board meeting. The exchange, brief but profound, hinted at Sarah's deeper intent, not just punishment, but transformation. Emily retreated to the galley, her hands trembling as she gripped the counter. The coffee spill, meant to reclaim some control, had backfired, leaving her exposed. Shame crept in, mingling with her stubborn resentment. She'd apologized, served Sarah, but the weight of her actions, targeting the CEO, her career in jeopardy, pressed harder. Passengers' whispers and phones felt like a spotlight, their social media posts amplifying her downfall. Tom, still writing, sensed the flight's symbolic weight. Emily, forced to confront her bias in Sarah's presence, was at a crossroads. Maria, reflecting on her own advocacy, saw a chance for redemption, even for someone like Emily. The cabin's soft hum continued, the flight steady but charged with unspoken tension. Sarah, reviewing her notes, remained a pillar of grace, her cane a reminder of her strength. Emily, in the galley, faced a mirror of her own making, her actions laid bare. The viral posts, Tom's notes, and Maria's empathy wove a narrative beyond the cabin, one of accountability and potential change. What would this flight teach Emily? And how would Sarah's quiet power shape the journey ahead? The answers loomed as the plane cruised toward Atlanta carrying the weight of their shared story. The first-class cabin of Delta Flight 934 to Atlanta was a cocoon of calm, the hum of the engines a steady pulse beneath the soft glow of ambient lights. The blue leather seats and polished tray tables spoke of luxury, but the air carried a quiet tension. Sarah Johnson, the 65-year-old CEO of Delta Airlines, sat by the window, her navy blazer folded neatly beside her. Her silver hair gleamed, and her mahogany cane, a family heirloom, rested against the seat, a symbol of her enduring strength. The morning's events at JFK's Gate 23, Emily Parker's prejudice, the torn ticket, the public apology, lingered in her mind, but Sarah's focus had shifted. She wasn't just seeking justice, she wanted understanding, even for someone like Emily. In a quiet corner of the cabin, near the galley curtain, Sarah beckoned Emily, the 30-year-old flight attendant. Emily approached, her Delta uniform crisp but her blonde hair slightly frayed, her face a mask of guarded resentment. The coffee spill, her petty attempt to undermine Sarah, had failed, and the passengers' whispers, fueled by viral videos, still stung. Her suspension loomed, her career in tatters, yet her prejudice clung stubbornly, a shield against the shame. "Miss Johnson, do you need something?" Emily asked stiffly, her voice low, laced with barely concealed bitterness. Sarah's warm eyes met hers, firm but not unkind. "Sit for a moment, Emily," she said gently, gesturing to the empty seat beside her. "We need to talk." Emily hesitated, her pulse quickening, but she complied, perching awkwardly. The cabin's hum seemed to fade, the moment intimate yet charged. Tom Reynolds, the 40-year-old journalist seated a few rows back, leaned forward, his tousled brown hair falling over his notepad. His viral story about the JFK incident was gaining traction, but this exchange promised deeper insight. He scribbled quietly, his ears attuned to Sarah's voice. Lisa Chen, the 25-year-old gate agent now on board as a trainee, hovered near the galley, her neat uniform reflecting her ambition. Her loyalty to Sarah had grown, and she watched, hoping this confrontation might spark change in Emily. Sarah leaned forward, her tone warm yet resolute. "Emily, what you did today wasn't just about me," she began, her voice steady. "It was about a belief you hold, one you haven't questioned. Prejudice like yours comes from privilege you don't even see." Emily's jaw tightened, her instinct to deflect rising, but Sarah's gaze held her in place. "When I was your age," Sarah continued, her voice softening, "I was a ticket agent at Delta, working nights in Memphis. I was up for a promotion, deserved it too. But a manager, a man who looked a lot like your father might, told me I didn't fit the image for leadership. I was black, female, and too bold for his comfort. That's systemic racism, Emily. It's not just one person. It's a structure that lets assumptions like yours thrive." Emily's eyes flickered, a mix of discomfort and defiance. "I didn't mean it like that," she muttered defensively, her voice trembling. "I was just doing my job." Sarah shook her head, her cane glinting as she shifted. "No, you were protecting a version of the world where people like me don't belong in first class, or at the top. I was you, Emily, in a way. Angry, sure, I was right. But I learned to listen, to see the bigger picture. You can, too." Her words, rooted in a 1970s Memphis airport, carried the weight of a young Sarah facing locked doors, her dreams deferred by bias. Tom's pen moved faster, capturing Sarah's story, its raw honesty a goldmine for his article. He saw the universal in it, American struggles with race, power, and redemption. Lisa, overhearing, felt a surge of pride, her own experiences as an Asian American woman echoing Sarah's fight. Emily, though, was visibly shaken, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sarah's words pierced her defenses, the memory of her father's rigid rules about earning first class clashing with this new perspective. She wanted to argue, to cling to her justifications, but the coffee spill's failure and Sarah's calm authority silenced her sabotage impulses. I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice cracking, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through. Maria Gonzalez, the 45-year-old passenger, watched from her seat, her elegant blazer hiding her advocate's heart. She'd seen Sarah's strength at JFK and now saw her wisdom, a masterclass in turning pain into teaching. Maria's own battles against injustice resonated, and she hoped Emily was listening. Passengers nearby, sensing the moment's weight, kept their phones down, respecting its intimacy. A social media post from earlier, Delta CEO schools flight attendant mid-flight, gained traction, but this conversation was private, profound. Sarah leaned back, her voice softening. "Think about who you want to be, Emily," she said earnestly. "Not just for me, but for every passenger you'll meet. You've got a choice." The plane's descent began, the cabin tilting slightly as Atlanta loomed. Emily stood, her face pale, her resentment softened but not gone. Sarah's lesson had planted a seed, its roots fragile but real. Tom noted the exchange's power, his story now about more than scandal. It was about change. Lisa approached Sarah, her voice quiet. "You're incredible," she said admiringly. Sarah smiled faintly. "Just doing what needs doing," she replied, her cane steady as she prepared for landing. The cabin's hum returned, but the moment lingered, a turning point in the sky. What would Emily do with Sarah's words? And how would they shape the reckoning ahead? The answers waited in Atlanta, as the plane descended into a new chapter. The boardroom at Delta Airlines headquarters in Atlanta gleamed with corporate polish, its glass walls framing a sweeping view of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport's runways. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mahogany table, where folders and water glasses sat in precise rows. Stephen Carter, the 55-year-old vice president, stood at the head, his commanding presence tempered by a fair-minded gaze. His tailored suit and Delta pin reflected decades of leadership, but today's disciplinary hearing weighed heavily. Emily Parker, the 30-year-old flight attendant, sat opposite, her blonde hair pinned tightly, though her Delta uniform couldn't hide her nervous fidgeting. The JFK incident, her prejudice against Sarah Johnson, Delta's CEO, had led to this moment, her career hanging in the balance. Sarah Johnson herself sat to Stephen's right, her silver hair catching the light, her navy blazer exuding quiet authority. Her mahogany cane rested against her chair, a symbol of resilience forged through years of overcoming bias. The flight to Atlanta, where she'd confronted Emily with a lesson on privilege, had only strengthened her resolve. She wasn't here to condemn Emily, but to guide her toward change. The room's tension was palpable, amplified by the viral storm outside. Tom Reynolds' article, "Delta CEO Faces Discrimination at Own Airline," was trending, with comments like, "Fire her," clashing with, "Give her a chance." Stephen cleared his throat, his voice firm but even. "Ms. Parker, you violated our core values. Explain your actions." Emily's hands trembled as she leaned forward, her voice shaky but earnest. I made a mistake," she said, her eyes darting to Sarah. "I assumed Ms. Johnson didn't belong in first class. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The admission, raw and halting, marked a shift from her earlier defiance. Sarah's words on the flight, about systemic racism and unexamined privilege, had cracked her defenses, though resentment still flickered. "I didn't mean to cause this," she added softly, her face flushing. Stephen's gaze softened slightly, but he pressed on. Your actions weren't just a mistake. They were discriminatory. Why should we keep you? Rachel Moore, Emily's 32-year-old ally and fellow flight attendant, sat in the corner, her short brown hair framing a nervous expression. Her loyalty to Emily, born of shared shifts and late-night gripes about passengers, had driven her to a reckless act. She'd submitted a report claiming Sarah's ticket was flagged as suspicious, hoping to lessen Emily's blame. Now, clutching the false document, she stood, her voice quavering. "Sir, I have evidence Emily was following protocol," she said anxiously, sliding the paper toward Stephen. But Stephen's eyes narrowed as he scanned it, his fingers tapping the table. "This is fabricated," he said sharply, holding up the report. "The system shows no such flag. Ms. Moore, you're risking your own standing." Rachel paled, sinking back, her misguided loyalty exposed. Sarah spoke, her voice warm yet commanding. "Stephen, Emily's actions were wrong, but firing her won't fix the root of this," she said firmly. "She needs retraining, on bias, on our values. Delta grows by learning, not by cutting people loose." Her advocacy stunned Emily, whose eyes widened, a mix of relief and shame washing over her. Sarah's mercy echoed her flight lesson, rooted in her own journey through discrimination, from a ticket agent in 1970s Memphis to CEO. Stephen nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I agree, Sarah. Retraining, 6 months, under strict oversight. Miss Parker, this is your chance to prove you belong here." Maria Gonzalez, the 45-year-old passenger and former civil rights advocate, wasn't present but had submitted a statement, read aloud by Stephen. "Ms. Johnson's dignity and leadership inspire us all," it began, praising Sarah's handling of the incident. Maria's words, sent from her new role as a passenger advocate, added weight to Sarah's approach, framing the hearing as a step toward systemic change. Outside, Tom Reynolds, the 40-year-old journalist, waited in the lobby, his tousled brown hair falling over his notepad. His article was shaping into a narrative of accountability and hope, and he sensed this hearing would be its crux. Social media buzzed, a post reading. Delta CEO pushes for retraining, not firing. Class act Emily's shoulders slumped, gratitude mingling with the sting of her actions' consequences. Rachel's failed deception had isolated her, but Sarah's advocacy offered a lifeline. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson," Emily whispered, her voice breaking, the first genuine crack in her armor. Sarah met her gaze, her eyes kind but unwavering. "Use this, Emily," she said softly. "Show us who you can be." Stephen closed the folder, his tone final. "You're dismissed, Ms. Parker. Report to the training facility tomorrow." Rachel, chastened, followed Emily out, her loyalty now a liability. The Atlanta skyline glowed through the glass, planes taxiing below as the hearing ended. Sarah adjusted her cane, her focus shifting to the board meeting ahead, but her impact on Emily lingered. The room, once tense, felt lighter, Sarah's vision of growth over punishment setting a new course. Tom, in the lobby, typed furiously, his story now about redemption's possibility. Maria's statement echoed online, amplifying Sarah's grace. Emily, stepping into the hall, felt the weight of her chance, a chance she hadn't earned but wouldn't waste. What would retraining reveal? And how would Sarah's mercy shape Delta's future? The answers lay ahead as Atlanta's runways hummed with promise. The Delta training facility in Atlanta hummed with purpose, its modern conference room lined with interactive screens and ergonomic chairs. Morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a diverse group of trainees. Flight attendants, gate agents, and customer service reps gathered for a 6-month program on cultural sensitivity and systemic bias. Emily Parker, the 30-year-old former flight attendant, sat near the back, her blonde hair loosely tied, her Delta polo a far cry from her crisp uniform of months past. The JFK incident, Her prejudice against Sarah Johnson, Delta's CEO, had led to her suspension, a public apology, and a boardroom reprieve, thanks to Sarah's advocacy. Now, Emily faced retraining, her career and identity on the line, her heart still wrestling with shame and stubborn pride. James Lee, the 48-year-old black former pilot and trainer, stood at the front, his calm presence and insightful gaze commanding attention. His Delta lanyard swung as he paced, sharing stories from his years in the cockpit, where he'd faced bias himself. "This isn't about blame," he said firmly, his voice warm but direct. "It's about understanding the systems we're part of, systems that shape how we see each other." Emily shifted uncomfortably, her arms crossed. Sarah's words on Flight 934 about unexamined privilege and systemic racism echoed in her mind. But she resisted. "I'm not the problem," she thought, her father's rigid ideals about earning status still clouding her perspective. She leaned to a trainee beside her, muttering skeptically, "This feels like a lecture, not training." James's sharp ears caught the comment, his eyes locking onto Emily's. "Ms. Parker, care to share?" he asked evenly, his tone challenging but patient. The room turned, trainee's eyes on her. Emily flushed, her defiance faltering. I don't see why we're dwelling on this," she said hesitantly, her voice low. James nodded, undeterred. "Because your actions at JFK weren't just about one passenger," he said, referencing the viral incident without judgment. "They reflected a mindset we're here to unpack." He clicked the screen, displaying a chart on implicit bias, grounding the lesson in data. Emily sank back, her resistance exposed, the room's attention a mirror of her accountability. Lisa Chen, now a 25-year-old promoted gate supervisor, visited the facility that day, her neat Delta blazer reflecting her rising star. Her admiration for Sarah had deepened, and she hoped Emily was listening. Spotting Emily, Lisa approached during a break, her voice encouraging. "You're here for a reason, Emily," she said warmly. "Sarah believed in you. Don't waste it." Emily nodded curtly, Lisa's words stirring the gratitude she felt in the boardroom but hadn't fully embraced. Outside, Tom Reynolds' article, "Delta's Redemption Arc," was gaining traction, framing Emily's retraining as a test of Sarah's vision. Social media buzzed, a post reading, "Flight attendant who dissed Delta CEO now in diversity boot camp. Will she change?" The turning point came during a workshop on survivor stories, where trainees shared personal experiences of bias. A young black trainee, Maya, stood, her voice steady but emotional. "I was 16, shopping in Buckhead," she began, describing Atlanta's upscale district. "A store clerk followed me, assuming I'd steal. I was just a kid, but it stuck with me, feeling like I didn't belong." Maya's story, raw and relatable, hit Emily like a wave. It mirrored Sarah's tale of being denied a promotion in 1970s Memphis. But Maya's youth made it personal. Emily's throat tightened, her mind flashing to Sarah at Gate 23, her dignity unshaken despite Emily's assumptions. For the first time, she saw the human cost of her bias, not as an abstract lesson but as pain she'd inflicted. James watched Emily closely, noting her glistening eyes. He approached after the session, his tone gentle but probing. "What's on your mind, Emily?" he asked sincerely. She hesitated, her voice breaking. I did that to someone," she admitted, her hands trembling. "To Miss Johnson. I made her feel like she didn't belong." The confession, raw and unfiltered, marked a crack in her armor. James nodded, his experience as a pilot who'd faced slurs guiding his response. "That's where growth starts," he said thoughtfully. "Seeing the harm, owning it. Now, what will you do with it?" Emily didn't answer, but the question lingered, a challenge to rebuild. The facility's screens flickered with case studies, the room alive with trainees' discussions. Emily, once skeptical, began engaging, asking questions, her resistance giving way to curiosity. Lisa, observing, felt a spark of hope, seeing Sarah's influence in Emily's shift. Maria Gonzalez, though absent, had her statement from the boardroom shared in a training module, praising Sarah's leadership, its echo reinforcing the program's purpose. Tom's article drafts grew, now focusing on Emily's journey as a microcosm of corporate change. Over 6 months, Emily bonded with James, his patient mentorship a steady guide, and with Maya, whose story became a touchstone. Her initial doubts, spread to trainees, faded as James's accountability and Maya's courage reshaped her. The Atlanta skyline loomed outside, planes soaring as Emily's retraining neared its end. She wasn't transformed yet, but the seeds Sarah planted, nurtured by James, Lisa, and Maya, were taking root. The facility's hum felt like a promise, a chance to redefine herself. What would Emily become? And how would her growth honor Sarah's mercy? The answers waited beyond the training room as Delta's values and Emily's future converged. JFK International Airport's Terminal 4 buzzed with the familiar chaos of a late morning in May 2026, a year after the incident that shook Delta Airlines. The scent of Starbucks coffee mingled with the clatter of rolling luggage, and the digital boards flickered with flight updates. At Gate 23, Emily Parker, now 31, stood behind the check-in podium, her Delta gate agent uniform crisp, her blonde hair tied back loosely, framing a confident smile. The rigidity that once defined her was gone, replaced by a warmth honed through 6 months of retraining. The JFK confrontation, her prejudice against Sarah Johnson, Delta's CEO, had been a painful catalyst, but Sarah's mercy, James Lee's mentorship, and Maya's story had transformed her. Emily now saw every passenger as a person, not a status. Sarah Johnson, 66, navigated the terminal with her mahogany cane, her silver hair gleaming under the lights, her navy blazer exuding quiet authority. She'd come to JFK for a diversity event, her leadership having sparked a company-wide initiative inspired by the incident. Spotting Emily at the gate, Sarah paused, her warm eyes assessing the woman who'd once torn her ticket. Emily, scanning boarding passes, radiated a newfound empathy, greeting an elderly passenger with a gentle, "Take your time, sir." Sarah's lips curved into a faint smile, her cane steady as she approached. "Miss Parker," she said warmly, her voice carrying the weight of their shared history. Emily looked up, her breath catching. "Miss Johnson," she replied softly, her eyes bright with gratitude. "You've come a long way," Sarah said sincerely, her gaze steady. "I hear you're making a difference here." Emily's cheeks flushed, the praise humbling. "I'm trying," she said earnestly. "What you said on that flight, about privilege, about listening, it changed how I see things. I'm sorry, again, for what I did." Her voice trembled, but her sincerity was unshaken. Sarah nodded, her expression kind but firm. "You've honored that apology with your actions," she said thoughtfully. "Keep going." The exchange, brief but profound, was a quiet victory, a testament to Sarah's vision of growth over punishment. A nearby passenger, recognizing Sarah from viral posts, tweeted, "Delta CEO and reformed gate agent at JFK. Redemption real." David Kim, a 22-year-old Korean-American Delta employee, stood beside Emily, his eager demeanor and neat uniform reflecting his newness. Hired recently, he looked up to Emily, who'd taken him under her wing. "David, always check in with passengers, not just their tickets," Emily advised gently, her tone mentor-like. "Everyone's got a story." David nodded, absorbing her wisdom, unaware of her past but inspired by her fairness. "Got it, Emily," he said enthusiastically. "You make this look easy." Emily smiled, a flicker of her old insecurity surfacing. She'd once judged passengers like David based on assumptions. Now she saw his potential, a mirror of her own second chance. Tom Reynolds, the 40-year-old journalist, had just published his final article, Delta's Redemption, a CEO's Grace, a Worker's Change, in a major outlet. With tousled brown hair and a notepad tucked away, he'd chronicled the saga from Gate 23 to Emily's transformation, crediting Sarah's leadership. The piece, trending with hashtags like #Delta Turnaround, framed the story as an American tale of accountability and second chances, resonating with readers nationwide. A comment read, "This is what growth looks like. Props to Sarah Johnson." Tom, passing through JFK, spotted Emily and David, noting her ease, a far cry from the rigid flight attendant he'd filmed. Maria Gonzalez, the 45-year-old former civil rights advocate, attended Delta's diversity event nearby, her elegant blazer hiding her fierce commitment to justice. Reuniting with Sarah, she embraced her voice warm. "You turned a moment of pain into progress," Maria said admiringly. Sarah's eyes crinkled. "It's what we do. Build from the hard stuff," she replied, her cane a steady anchor. Maria's presence, echoing her support from the flight and boardroom statement, tied the story's threads together, her advocacy amplifying Sarah's impact. Social media buzzed with event photos, one captioned, "Delta's Diversity Push, inspired by a CEO who walked the talk." Emily's transformation shone in a quiet moment before Sarah's departure. A passenger, an older black woman, approached the gate, her ticket crumpled. A year ago, Emily might have bristled, but now she smiled, her voice gentle. "Let's get this sorted, ma'am," she said kindly, fixing the issue with care. Later, she apologized to the woman for any past Delta slights, her words unprompted but heartfelt. "I've learned to do better," she said softly. The passenger nodded, touched, unaware of Emily's journey but feeling her sincerity. David, watching, saw a model for his own career, Emily's empathy a legacy of Sarah's lesson. The terminal's chaos swirled, announcements blaring, travelers rushing, but Gate 23 felt like an oasis of change. Emily, mentoring David, embodied the empathy she'd once lacked. Sarah, heading to her event, carried the pride.